Okay, welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take your sources, really dive in, and pull out the most important insights.
That's right.
And today, we're exploring something I think resonates with quite a few people right now. It's this subtle, sometimes even painful struggle that many face in modern spiritual seeking, and how some very ancient wisdom might actually offer a different path, a surprisingly potent one.
We're digging into some really fascinating material today, particularly focusing on a source that centers around a figure called Dakshinakali.
Right?
So our mission for this deep dive is to first really get a handle on the core problem that's laid out. Why does spiritual practice sometimes feel so stuck or disconnected for people today?
Yeah.
And then explore the specific alternative perspective, the wisdom the source suggests could maybe help unlock some genuine transformation.
Okay, so where do we start with this? This feeling of being stuck. The source paints it as like a subtle thing initially, right? But persistent.
Exactly. A sense that something's just off or missing. You might have the external stuff sorted. Maybe you've been on a spiritual coach for years doing the practices.
Doing all the things.
Right, doing all the things. But that deep sense of fulfillment or like real change, it feels just out of reach.
And it's more than just a little frustrating, it sounds like. The material suggests this can really grow into something bigger.
Oh, yeah. It can escalate into what feels like a genuine existential crisis for some.
Yeah.
And the tricky part is, often the very practices people are turning to, meditation, yoga, retreats, all valuable stuff.
Yeah, the standard toolkit.
Exactly. They don't seem to quite hit the root of this specific kind of pain.
I hear that description a lot, actually. People who are really sincere, putting in the time, the effort, trying to do everything they think is right. But they're still left with this ongoing feeling of disconnection, uncertainty. Like transformation is always just over the horizon, but never quite here. It feels like a common, quiet struggle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the source gets specific about how this pain actually shows up. It's not just vague unease.
Like what?
Well, things like decision paralysis, feeling totally frozen, or finding yourself repeating the same negative relationship patterns again and again.
Yeah.
Creative blocks you just can't seem to push through.
Right.
Or maybe living with this persistent low-level anxiety that, mindfulness helps manage, but doesn't fully dissolve.
Okay. And what about this idea of spiritual materialism that came up too?
Right. That's a really interesting point. It's where the practices, or maybe the knowledge itself, kind of become another form of consumption, another thing to accumulate or perform.
Like collecting spiritual trading cards or something.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of being about genuine inner change, it's more about building a spiritual identity.
It really is a strange paradox, isn't it? We've got, unprecedented access to teachings, techniques, anything you want, it's online, instantly. Yet, right alongside that, there seems to be this huge amount of confusion, maybe even suffering, within the seeking community itself. It's like having this massive library.
But not knowing how the books actually connect or lead anywhere meaningful.
Yeah. There was a quote in the material from a practitioner that really landed with me. They said something like, after 20 years on this path, I realized I've been decorating my prison cell rather than finding the key to genuine freedom.
Wow. Yeah, that hits hard.
It really does. It speaks to that potential for profound disillusionment, even after years of really trying.
And that quote points to something the source really emphasizes, the insidious nature of this particular kind of suffering.
How so? Insidious.
Because it can hide so easily behind the appearance of spiritual engagement. You know the terms, you can talk the talk, maybe you've done countless workshops.
You've got the spiritual resume.
You've got the spiritual resume, perfect. But there's this gap, often an agonizing one, between all that accumulated knowledge and your actual lived, transformed experience.
And it seems like this pain gets even louder when we start to honestly look at the landscape of modern spirituality itself. Some uncomfortable truths there.
Definitely. The source points to a few things, like how ancient wisdom often gets commercialized, repackaged, maybe softened.
Prioritizing comfort over challenge.
Yeah, maybe prioritizing mass appeal or comfort over the potentially disruptive, truly catalytic power that was maybe in the original teachings.
Yeah.
And that can dilute the practices.
And then there's just the sheer noise, trying to find genuinely helpful guidance, maybe a real teacher amidst all the self-proclaimed gurus and questionable advice out there.
It's overwhelming. And linked to that is this tendency towards spiritual bypassing.
The good vibes only trap.
Exactly. Using spiritual ideas or positive thinking to avoid confronting the messy, difficult, shadow aspects of ourselves. But facing that stuff is often where the real growth happens.
Right. Plus, the source mentions stripping away cultural contexts.
Yeah, taking these powerful practices out of the frameworks and safeguards that originally held them, which can sometimes make them less effective or even subtly misleading.
So the result of all this, according to the material, is that a lot of sincere seekers feel trapped.
Trapped in spiritual cul-de-sacs is the phrase used.
Right. Educated maybe beyond their actual experience, practicing diligently but feeling like the transformation is minimal and just disillusioned, wondering if authentic awakening is even really possible.
It really makes you think of that warning from Swami Vivekananda, which the source brings up, from over a century ago.
About error, not sin.
Yes. He said Vedanta sees the problem as error, not sin. And the biggest error. Believing you are weak, believing you're powerless, that real transformation is beyond you.
Like settling for spiritual entertainment.
Instead of striving for actual liberation.
Yeah. Which, okay, perfectly leads us to the alternative perspective this source introduces. A figure stepping right into this landscape of confusion. Dakshinakali.
Yes. Described as representing this form of divine feminine wisdom, very ancient, but also presented as incredibly relevant for these modern challenges we've been talking about.
And she's often called right-hand Kali. That name itself, it's significant, isn't it?
Hugely significant.
Right.
Dakshina means right hand or southern facing, but implies a path that works within the world, within the structures of everyday life.
So not necessarily requiring renunciation or dropping everything to live in a cave?
Exactly. It's positioned as a path for people living householder lives, engaging with the world to find transformation right there. Unlike, say, the imagery associated with Smashanakali, the Kali of the cremation ground, which represents a more renunciate path.
Okay, so this wisdom, Dakshinakali's wisdom, is presented as a kind of medicine, maybe, for that modern spiritual malaise.
That's a good way to put it. And the source highlights some key aspects, key principles of this wisdom.
What are they?
Well, one core principle is discriminating awareness. The Sanskrit term is viveka. It's often symbolized by a sword.
A sword cutting through confusion.
Precisely. Cutting through confusion. It's the clarity to discern, for example, which practices are truly aimed at transformation versus those that might just be spiritual entertainment or ego enhancement. Okay. It helps you see the difference between identifying with a spiritual idea of yourself versus actually experiencing realization.
So that sword helps cut through our own self-deception, too, the stories we tell ourselves, and maybe helps in discerning teachers, like we mentioned earlier.
Exactly that. It's about clarity on all levels. Then, another key aspect is termed fierce compassion.
Fierce compassion, that sounds like a paradox.
It does, but it's crucial. This isn't just gentle, passive niceness. This is compassion with teeth. Compassion that doesn't shrink away from necessary confrontation.
Confrontation with what? Difficult truths.
Yes, confrontation with comfortable illusions, with limiting patterns in ourselves and others. It's the courage to acknowledge uncomfortable truths, even when it's painful.
So it implies needing courage. The courage to, say, set boundaries, even if it upsets someone.
Absolutely. The willingness to end relationships or situations that are genuinely hindering growth, even if it's hard. Yeah. And it's also about self-compassion, but a fierce, kind one that doesn't let you off the hook or allow you to bypass your own shadow stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Then there's the principle of surrender as strength. This is really embodied in her iconography, standing on Shiva.
Which looks dominant but isn't meant that way.
Right. The source explains it's not about dominance over Shiva, who represents pure static consciousness. She, Kali, is the dynamic principle, Shakti, activating that potential. It shows that true surrender isn't weakness.
How so?
It teaches that real power, real liberation, often comes not from trying harder to control everything, trying to force a spiritual outcome.
Which is often what we do try to do.
Totally. Instead, it comes from releasing that tight grip of control, distinguishing genuine surrender, which is active, and trusting from mere passivity. There's immense power in letting go of the limited self, surrendering the whole spiritual ambition project.
Letting go of the spiritual resume again.
Exactly. And finally, there's the integration of shadow. Her dark complexion itself points to this embracing the fullness of reality, not just the light and pleasant parts.
This seems vital, given the point about spiritual bypassing.
Absolutely. It's about actively integrating those parts of ourselves we might deny, reject, or feel ashamed of. Learning to see the wisdom hidden within difficult emotions, rather than just trying to transcend them or push them away.
So getting comfortable with complexity. with paradox.
Yes, leading to a more grounded, authentic, embodied spirituality rather than something disconnected or purely intellectual.
These principles definitely sound powerful. Does the source give examples? Like, how has engaging with this consciousness actually played out for people?
Yes, it provides both historical and more contemporary examples to illustrate this transformative power. Think about Ramakrishna, for instance.
The 19th century mystic.
Right. His path involved incredibly intense devotional practice. But he reached this point of absolute rock bottom, utter despair, feeling like life wasn't worth living if he couldn't have this direct vision of the Divine Mother he sought.
And the story, as it's told, is pretty dramatic.
Extremely. It's recounted in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which the source references. He's in the temple, literally about to end his own life out of desperation.
Yeah.
And then suddenly,
the vision happened.
Yes, the Blessed Mother revealed herself. And in that moment, everything just dissolved. His concepts, his attachments, everything. It was replaced by this overwhelming experience described as a limitless, infinite, effulgent ocean of consciousness.
Wow.
It completely overwhelmed him, rendered him unconscious. The key thing is, this wasn't about learning more facts or techniques. It was total surrender, leading to total transformation. It shifted him from a desperate seeker into this hugely influential spiritual teacher.
And then there's his main disciple, Swami Vivekananda. He started out quite different, didn't he? Very intellectual, skeptical.
Very much so. And he faced his own profound crisis, especially after Ramakrishna passed away. He wrestled with doubt.
Right.
It was during that period, the source recounts, that he had his own incredibly powerful direct vision of Mother Kali while he was in Varanasi.
And what happened in that vision?
She basically declared her nature to him. I am the absolute existence, knowledge, bliss. I am the divine mother of the universe. Creation and destruction take place within me. And crucially, she told him, I have brought you to Varanasi to do my work.
So, again, not just an idea, a direct commission almost.
Exactly. And like with Ramakrishna, this direct embodied experience was the catalyst. It transformed his brilliant intellectual understanding into lived embodied wisdom. That's what gave his message such power when he brought these Eastern ideas to the world stage.
Okay, those are powerful historical examples. What about more recently? Does the source mention contemporary cases?
Yes, it shares experiences from people involved in workshops or retreats connected to this Dakshinakali consciousness.
Like who?
There's the example of Maya. A corporate executive, apparently been seeking for 20 years, had tons of knowledge, but felt that gap we discussed. Stuck.
The classic scenario.
Right. And during a specific Dakshinakali meditation focused on surrendering her spiritual resume, all those identities and achievements as a seeker, she described feeling something just. Cut through decades of spiritual pretense.
Cut through, like the sword of Viveka.
Precisely. It wasn't an empty feeling, but this sudden, profound clarity. She realized how much she'd been using her practices unconsciously to enhance her sense of a separate self rather than truly letting it go.
And did that lead to actual change?
According to the account, yes. Tangible transformation followed in her decision-making, her creative flow, even her relationships, reportedly within months.
Interesting. Any others?
There's also James, a psychotherapist. He was struggling with burnout, compassion fatigue, something many helping professionals face.
Where'd it come?
He found that engaging with Dakshinakali practices helped him connect with that fierce compassion principle we talked about earlier.
The compassion with boundaries.
Exactly. Compassion that isn't just being a doormat. It gave him the clarity and strength to set necessary boundaries, to say no when needed, and to recognize codependent patterns he might have previously mistaken for virtue.
So it helped him cut through unhealthy patterns disguised as niceness.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it apparently transformed not just his personal well-being, but also how he approached his professional practice.
Okay, so bringing this all back around, for you, the listener, if you're potentially feeling some of that frustration, that disconnect, that sense that real change is just elusive. The source seems to be suggesting that this Dakshinakali wisdom offers something specific, something practical and doable right here in the midst of everyday life.
Yeah, it's definitely not presented as just comfortable spiritual entertainment. It's framed as a potent path towards genuine liberation, using those tools: discriminating awareness, fierce compassion, surrender as strength, and shadow integration.
And importantly, the source suggests there are actual methodologies, practical ways developed from experience to engage these principles day to day without needing, extreme measures.
Right. Accessible yet potent.
So, to kind of wrap up this deep dive, for anyone feeling that quiet, maybe growing ache of disconnection, despite really sincere spiritual efforts,
Yeah.
sensing that deep transformation feels frustratingly out of reach.
Hmm.
The material we've explored today presents Dakshinakali's wisdom, not as maybe a gentle alternative, but as a fierce, powerful path.
A path designed, it seems, for finding authentic liberation within the messiness and complexity of modern life.
Right. And maybe the provocative thought to leave you with, just building on all this, is to consider the kind of courage this path seems to require.
Courage is a good word for it.
The courage to really, truly face what is, inside yourself and in your life outside. The courage to surrender what no longer genuinely serves your deepest truth, even if it feels like part of your identity, or provides some kind of false comfort.
Letting go of the familiar, even if it's painful.
Exactly. And the courage to embrace that fierce kind of compassion, one that's willing to cut through illusion, cut through your own perceived limitations to actually make space for real transformation to happen.
It reminds me of Vivekananda's point again. Perhaps the ultimate practice is having that fundamental faith in your own true nature.
Yeah.
And finding the courage to be true to it, even and maybe especially when it means confronting some pretty uncomfortable truths along the way.